There are other times where, as in some creative writing works that you can look at, or even, for example, not just Quentin Tarantino, but other people, you might take a snapshot or a segment of one thing, of one idea here, and then you might take a completely separate idea, and then you edit these parts together, and when you finally put some of the parts together, it forms the composite whole. And sometimes, and in some cultures, people think more like that. In German and Northern European countries, and in America, we tend to be more linear and appreciate the formal business linear style of thought and writing. Which I also actually appreciate, especially from other people. I really like to see concise, even though I'm not that way, I really appreciate how other people are different from me, and when they are that way, because I really admire that. Because I'm not always like that way. I'm not always like that. So I admire that in others. But there are other cultures where, in some Asian cultures a little bit more in the middle, maybe, but South American cultures, and I think some African cultures, maybe parts of Africa, and I think some Asian cultures, although, like I said, I think they're more in the middle. This is talking about what they call, and I've forgotten all of my education on this, but it's like called high context, low context societies, and they're the ways that they communicate. It's kind of a sociological approach to different cultures and what things they have in common, how they tend to communicate with each other in society. And then this class that I took was about how then to understand how people will receive your communications, and how something that you say as an American with the American context might be misinterpreted in Asia because they have a different context of looking at things. So while some people, as I said, are speak in a linear fashion, in South America and some other areas they speak in a more circular, sometimes, not all, can more commonly communicate in a circular fashion where they don't just talk or write from point A to then the next thing to then the next thing. They go from here, and then they go into a tangent over here, and then a tangent over here, and then a tangent over here, but then everybody always knows that they're following those different spires, and then they all come back to the same idea. So basically I started talking about people that I've known and met who have something to do with, my records disappearing, or military, or NASA, or something like that, different things that stood out. And then I branched off into talking about the first situation, which was this counseling situation. And then I branched off into talking about, leading up to what happened in that situation, I then branched off into explaining what it's like to be tortured, and a torture response. And now I'm going to bring it back to the center a little bit, where I was starting, having explained that. So if it's hard to follow, if it seems like I'm rambling, I'm really not. Like I'm always keeping track of my idea here, and then how it's coming this direction or that, whatever, how it's forming the whole picture. So, having explained to you a response of torture in context with responses that humans have to trauma of any kind, when she asked me if I was depressed, I said no. And when she asked if she could document me on video camera, I said no, I wasn't comfortable with that. And I then kind of got a weird feeling, because it wasn't really against her, it was that whoever was supervising her was really wanting to get more into my business than I was comfortable with. I mean, why did they need a videotaped document of me speaking to her? What was the point of that? They really, this was my private counseling. It wasn't something that I wanted to have shared. You know, if she had to share some notes that she was taking, that's fine. But what was someone going to use against me by having a videotaped document of me? I mean, was someone going to say, look, she's crying here, she's clearly depressed, let's prescribe or something? And I just felt that that was a little bit of an invasion of privacy. So she had already agreed that I pretty much processed everything, and then I discontinued. I said, I think everything's fine. I've resolved what I needed to resolve, and I want to discontinue. I think I'll discontinue the counseling now. Thank you. And she agreed with me that everything that sounded right to her. And then I tried to get my records from that group, and I remember that the director was refusing to release my records to me, and I didn't know why. And then after police or after Brother Ansgar had hung up the phone on me and said, you know, when I was told by this one priest over and over, call him, and I'm like, why should I call him? He's the person that I wouldn't call, right? Well, I called him, and it was that situation that I've already described, where it was like I was getting set up to make the call, and then when I heard it click, I called again, and then it was this announcement of, you know, I consider your calls to be harassment, and I will treat them as such. Well, calls implies that I'd made many calls to him, and I had never called him prior to that time. But I had a feeling that he had documented that to make it sound like I had been calling him, make it sound like I was the person who was harassing him. And, you know, to realize that that's probably what was going on, and to think, oh my gosh, he's like supposed to be a monk. I mean, I know that monks are human beings like everyone else, and they make mistakes and they do bad things, but I was still really shocked. I mean, it wasn't like, it's one thing to make mistakes in the course of human nature and not thinking about it, and then you realize, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But I mean, it was like a premeditated mistake. And so anyway, the only time that somebody had said something about harassment was then. And I had this feeling that he gave it to police, or that their lawyers were trying to make up some fictitious case against me. And just to make me look bad, which was true. I found out later it was true. And then what was very strange is that all of a sudden here I had this counseling. This is very weird. But I had this counseling at the Western Psychological Place about Josh Gatov. Mm-hmm. And when I was trying to get my records from that, the director of the place told me, he said, when I kept asking and they kept refusing to release anything, I called again, and then he said something about harassment, and I hadn't harassed him at all. I mean, I have no way of, I sometimes really wish that I had God right here next to me and in person so that he could say, and she's telling the truth. I mean, just believe me. I called like a normal person calls to get records, and then all of a sudden this director was accusing me of harassment, and I thought, that is really weird. So I thought, is he, because at that point I was having a few problems with the Abbey, and I wondered if he was Catholic at that point, because I thought, why would he even bring that up or make that suggestion when nobody in my entire life had ever said anything like that, and the only people that had ever made that claim was a monk at this Mount Angel Abbey monastery, and then finding out that it had gone to their police. So I just thought, who does he know? The police? Or a person with the Catholic Church? And I'm not sure if possibly the counselor that I was speaking to, Carol Lee, was maybe Catholic. I mean, I don't know. I didn't ask at the time. I just went to a counselor and expected them to treat me regardless of my religious beliefs and their religious beliefs equally or without discrimination. So I remember thinking that I knew without any doubt that it wasn't a coincidence, because for him to say that when he knew that I hadn't harassed him at all, and to use that word indicated to me that he was that he knew somebody, because he was making false claims just as they were. And he refused to release my records to me. To this day, I made several attempts after that in the years after. To this day, they have never released records. And when I last checked, just this last year in Oregon, they told me that they have no record of my having ever gone to their counseling center, ever. And all of my counseling documentation of being raped was with that clinic. So basically, they're covering up for Josh Gatov, because the only thing that I was talking about was Josh Gatov. I wasn't discussing anything else. I was discussing my being raped. So I think it's very strange that all of a sudden they claimed they have no record of me. And the entire time that they did have records of me, I kept trying to access them, and they never once released them to me. I made formal written requests, signed in person. I drove the request. I went in person and handed it to the receptionist. After sending email asking for it, and after being on the phone with them asking for it, I went in person with my formal request. And they never processed it. They never gave me anything ever. So it is a little bit weird as to how I was treated, what was going on exactly at that counseling center. And that is the first time I'd ever been to counseling of any kind, and I went there voluntarily. So, I need a drink of coffee. So I think that I probably, just for whatever reason, need to mention that, because it is something that happened after I had this implantation, and then after I met these monks, and after I was raped. And somewhere along the line, somebody was covering for someone. And I think it's really, I know that later when I went to police, I told them that I had counseling records at that clinic, and they never obtained them. I mean, the Portland PD had clear-cut evidence. I had an extremely strong case. It was pretty much, there was no way that, there was no way a jury would rule against me. I had too much documentation, I had too many character witnesses, and I had no past, like bad past. There was no reason to not believe me. I had no mental illness, no criminal record. I'd given $40,000 away to the community to help with different things, and worked in churches. I mean, why would somebody not believe me? And I had no motive or reason to lie about something like that. So what is a little strange is that the people that were mainly seeing this, using this thing about harassment, was the Catholic Church. And I never heard that from the Jewish side, which Josh Gatov was connected to. However, the only time that I saw any kind of connection between Jewish and Catholic was when I took my Jewish supervisor, who was also the supervisor for this man who raped me, who's Jew. And I invited her to a Mount Angel Abbey Christmas concert. And she met Brother Ansgar, Santa Grossi. And I thought their interactions with each other was a little bit different. So, I mean, it suggested to me that they were working together and for some reason sort of working against me. And I thought that at the time even. But I couldn't imagine why. And I maybe have an idea or two. But I want to take, I'm going to take a quick break. And then I will finish what I'm talking about. And then go into the other couple of things and individuals I met, which might have some bearing on people who are connected to monitoring or observing me through military, NASA, or just some kind of a religious circle that wanted to get rid of me conveniently.